They were clinking glasses in Bali while I was holding our father's hand as he died. They said I was dramatic until the will named only me. This is what happens when the forgotten child is the only one who shows up. You won't want to miss this story. But before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. My phone buzzed against the nightstand like it was trying to shake the whole table awake, but by the time I opened my eyes and blinked through the crust of sleep, it had already stopped 3 missed calls, all from a number I didn't recognize, followed by a single voicemail that made my blood run cold before I even played it. The voice was soft, clinical, rehearsed in the way only a nurse's can be, but the words felt like they knocked the air out of my lungs. Your father has been admitted to the ICU. He's in critical condition. You should come as soon as possible. I sat up too fast, heart pounding, and stared at the screen as if it would change, maybe rewind time, maybe give me another chance to not be blindsided like this. I opened the family group chat. Nothing. Not a single message. No missed calls from my mother. No text from either of my siblings. Just silence, as if I wasn't part of them anymore. And maybe I wasn't. Maybe I hadn't been since I moved out 2 years ago after the fight that split the family down invisible lines, me on one side, all of them clumped together on the other, acting like I was the unstable one for calling out the things they never dared to name. My hands shook as I scrolled through photos of us from years ago, searching for something proof we were once a real family, that I wasn't just some estranged footnote they'd learned to crop out. My fingers hovered over the group chat again, tempted to ask, "Did any of you know?" But I stopped myself because I already knew the answer, and I wasn't in the mood to be ghosted in real time. I opened a travel app instead, and booked the earliest flight I could find, one that left in less than 5 hours. I had just enough time to pack a bag and shower off the sick feeling clinging to my skin. My stomach churned as I stood there in the middle of my living room, suitcase half-zipped, phone clutched like a lifeline, the weight of silence pressing down on me harder than grief ever could. I should have been used to it by now, being left out of the loop, being treated like the difficult one, but nothing prepares you for learning your father might be dying from a stranger while your own blood forgets you exist. I didn't even know what hospital he was in until I called the number back, and even then, I had to verify my identity 3 different ways before they would tell me what room to go to. I looked around my apartment one last time before I left, this quiet space I'd built out of scraps of solitude, and I whispered something I didn't even fully hear myself say. Maybe it was a prayer. Maybe it was a curse. All I knew was, I was going back. Alone. Again. The scent hits before I even see him. That sharp chemical blend of antiseptic and recycled air that seems to cling to every inch of ICU hallways. The kind of smell that tells you something sacred and terrifying happens here every day, and today it's happening to me. The nurse walks fast, barely making eye contact, as she leads me past beeping monitors and half-drawn curtains, her voice polite and distant like she's escorting a stranger, not someone about to face the dying breath of their own blood. I brace myself at the threshold, but nothing could have prepared me for the sight of him. My father, this man who once carried me on his shoulders through every autumn carnival, now so small in that hospital bed, pale and drowning in wires. There's a machine pushing air into him in quiet mechanical rhythms and another dripping fluids into his arm, and for a second I can't tell where he ends and the machines begin. His face is sunken, ashen, lips cracked, eyes closed tight like he's trying to will the world away. I step closer and whisper his name, softly, just once, like a test, and get nothing back but the steady hum of artificial life. The nurse comes in to check the chart, and I ask, my voice barely above a whisper, who brought him in, who signed him in, who listed the emergency contact, and she glances down, casually flips the clipboard, and says the words that turn my bones to ice. Next of kin unknown. 3 words that feel like a slap across my face, a final erasure. I want to scream that I'm his daughter, that I have his chin and his stubborn heart and the same goddamn crooked pinky from the same dumb childhood fall. But the silence in the room dares me to speak, and I lose. I just stand there, swallowing that betrayal like a dry stone lodged in my throat, unable to make it move. I think about my mother, tanning somewhere in Bali, probably sipping something with mint and rum, while her husband lies here between life and death. And I wonder how she explains her absence to herself. If she even bothers. I look down at his hand, resting limp by his side, and I hesitate before reaching for it. His skin is cold and thinner than I remember, like paper. I grip it anyway, gently, like maybe I can remind him that someone showed up. Someone still thinks he matters. The nurse leaves without saying another word, and I sit beside him, trying to match my breathing to the rhythm of the ventilator. The only thing louder than the machines is the echo of all the things I never got to say, the apologies I never received, the explanations I'll never get. I whisper anyway. Not for him, for me. For the girl who was always easy to forget, until now. I sit in the stiff vinyl chair beside my father's bed, my spine aching from the hours I've been folded into worry, and with one hand still wrapped around his, I pull out my phone and open the family group chat, half hoping maybe they've sent something, anything, even just a question mark, but it's nothing but stale air in digital form, unread messages from weeks ago about birthdays and brunch plans, and not a single word about the man gasping for breath through tubes just inches from me. I call my mother first, pressing her name like maybe it'll mean something more this time, but it goes straight to voicemail, not even a ring. Just that familiar clipped voice telling me to leave a message she'll never check. I stare at the phone like it might change its mind, then try my sister next, and for one breath I think she won't answer either, but then the line clicks and her voice comes through. Casual and breezy like she's picking up groceries, not ignoring the deathbed of her own father. "Can't talk right now," she says, like I'm the one being inconvenient. Then laughter in the background, voices, music, waves crashing maybe. Before I can say his name, she hangs up. I sit there stunned, blinking like I've been slapped, and open Instagram almost without thinking, needing some proof that I'm not crazy, that this isn't all in my head. And there they are. My brother, my sister, my mother, all tagged in glossy group photos at some beachside resort in Bali, bright blue water behind them, sunglasses perched just so, cocktails in hand. The caption is sickeningly cheerful. Family time, healing vibes. Underneath, hundreds of likes, fire emojis, friends commenting about how beautiful they all look. I zoom in on one photo, my mother mid-laugh, head tilted back, no trace of grief or concern. I checked the timestamp. It was posted 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes. While I was wiping sweat from my father's forehead, watching machines beep out the rhythm of a heart that might not make it to morning, they were deciding between poolside mojitos or beachfront massages. I don't know what hurts more, the absence or the performance. I close the app and stare at my reflection in the black screen, eyes hollow, mouth pressed in a line that's held too much for too long. I want to call again. I want to scream. But instead, I sit in the silence they've gifted me, and I let it settle like dust in my lungs. If this is what family means to them, curated joy and intentional forgetting, then let them stay on their island. I'll stay here, in the real world, with the man they left behind. Growing up, I learned early that love in our house was measured in endurance, not affection, and I wore that truth like armor while everyone else floated above it, untouched by the mess beneath the surface. I was the one who scrubbed the kitchen floor after Dad's episodes, who ran interference when his mood turned sideways, who learned how to lie to teachers and family friends with a smile that didn't match my eyes. I was there for every hospital trip, every slurred apology, every empty promise. I held his hand during surgeries, memorized his medication schedule, learned which nurses to trust and which ones just wanted the shift to end. My siblings were ghosts when things got hard, reappearing like clockwork for holidays and social media birthdays, always pristine in their distance, always praised for doing so little. I was the one who stayed, who kept the boat from sinking, who paid in silence while they paid in convenience. And then came the final fight, the one that blew through our family like a windstorm through dry timber. I said things they called unforgivable, but really, I just told the truth out loud and they couldn't stand the sound of it. So I moved out, took my grief and my truth, and left them to their curated version of reality, and they didn't chase me. Instead, they rewrote the story without me, cast me as dramatic, unstable, too emotional to keep around. It was easier that way. I became the punchline to their group texts, the one they didn't invite to Christmas, the one who got whispered about when I wasn't in the room. But now here we are, years later, and Dad is dying, and the air in this ICU room is thick with all the things they refuse to face. And I'm the only one here, not them. Not the golden children in Bali sipping something cold under the sun, me. The forgotten daughter, the one who was supposedly too much, the one who never got to be carefree. I sit beside him, watching his chest rise and fall in a rhythm that feels borrowed, and I wonder if he knows it's me. I wonder if part of him remembers the girl who wiped blood from his chin after a fall, who covered for him when Mom was out of town, who whispered lullabies to herself because no one else would. The nurse comes in and gives me a tired smile. "You're doing great," she says, like I'm new to this. But I've been doing this all my life. They just didn't see it. Or maybe they chose not to. And now, as his life fades and the world outside spins on, I realize I don't need their validation. I was never the dramatic one. I was the witness, the caretaker, the one who stayed. And in the quiet hum of machines and old regrets, I finally understand that showing up was never weakness. It was the proof I existed. The doctor looked at me with that careful sort of expression that always comes before something irreversible is said, the kind of practiced sympathy that tries to be gentle but still feels like a slap in the face. "His liver is failing," he said, and then he paused just long enough for the rest of the sentence to hang in the air like smoke. "If you hadn't come when you did," he didn't need to say the rest. I felt it in my bones. I nodded like I understood, like I could process it in real time, but my heart was already sinking through the floor, dragging everything with it. The doctor moved on, probably to deliver another blow to someone else down the hall, while I turned back to the bed that had become the center of my world in the span of hours. My father stirred beneath the stiff white sheets, his face twitching like a dream was trying to pull him back. I leaned in, afraid to hope, afraid to breathe, and then I heard it, faint and cracked, but unmistakably his voice. "Where is everyone?" 3 words, no more, but they cut through me like glass. I looked into his half-open eyes and saw something raw, something waiting. I opened my mouth, and the truth tried to claw its way out, but I choked it back. I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell him they weren't coming, that they were halfway across the world sipping from pineapples while he clung to life. So I did what I had to do. I lied. "They're on their way," I said, and I smiled like it wasn't tearing me apart. He let out a weak breath and nodded slightly, and I watched his face settle into something softer, like maybe the idea of them was enough. My chest burned, my throat felt like sand. I sat back down, every inch of me aching with the weight of what I'd just done. It shouldn't have been me here alone. It shouldn't have been me lying to protect them from the reality they refused to face. But I knew him, and I knew that in his final days, he didn't need to carry one more disappointment. So I let the lie live in the space between us. I held his hand, my fingers wrapped around his like they used to be when I was small and scared of thunderstorms. I told myself I would hold that lie as long as he needed it. And in the quiet hum of machines and the slow tick of the wall clock, I whispered again for both of us. "They're on their way." Because if he was going to leave this world, I wanted the last thing he felt to be hope, even if it wasn't true. The cup of ice chips in my hand was almost empty, the condensation dripping onto my palm as I gently pressed another sliver against my father's cracked lips, watching the smallest motion of relief pass across his face like a flicker of wind through still water. He couldn't speak now, not really, but his eyes opened just enough to find mine, and I smiled like everything was fine, like this wasn't one of the last moments I might ever get with him. The machines hummed in a lazy rhythm beside us, too steady for what I felt inside. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, and I almost ignored it, not wanting to break whatever fragile calm we had created in this quiet room, but something told me to check. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen, and there it was, my brother, grinning at the camera from an infinity pool that looked out over turquoise water so vivid it didn't seem real. His caption felt like a punch to the stomach, "No place I'd rather be." I stared at the words, at his smile, at the reflection of sunlight in his sunglasses, and something in me snapped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't swallow. I muttered something about needing to use the restroom, set the cup down, and walked quickly out of the room, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the corridor. I passed nurses and patients and beeping monitors until I found a supply closet and slipped inside, slamming the door behind me with a force that rattled the shelves. It smelled like bleach and rubber gloves and something sharp and metallic that made my throat sting. I sank to the floor, pulled my jacket over my mouth, and screamed into it, a raw, wordless sound that had been building in my chest for hours, maybe years. I screamed for the man lying in that bed, alone except for me. I screamed for the family that abandoned him. I screamed for myself, for the girl who always showed up, who never mattered enough to be called. My breath came out ragged and hot against the fabric, and my fingers curled into fists in my lap. I stared at the glow of my phone screen in the dark, at the image of my brother's smile, at the comments from friends who called them goals and envied their closeness. I wanted to reply. I wanted to post a photo of Dad with tubes in his throat and say this is what they left behind, but I didn't. I sat there in that tiny, windowless room with my heartbreak echoing off the walls, and I let the weight of their absence settle over me like dust. They were sipping cocktails and smiling for strangers, and I was wiping blood from cracked lips and catching the last pieces of a man they once loved. No place I'd rather be. The cruelty of it nearly swallowed me whole. I stared at the screen for a long time before I typed anything, my thumbs hovering like they needed permission to break the silence that had been festering in our family thread for far too long. The blinking cursor felt heavier than any words I had ever written, like it was daring me to be the one to say what none of them had the decency to face. I kept it short, because the truth did not need poetry. He's dying. If you care at all, come home. I hit send and watched the message land in the group chat, sitting there like a live wire in a room full of people pretending not to notice. The second I sent it, I wished I could unsend it, not because I didn't mean it, but because I knew exactly how it would be received, or not received. I sat there gripping my phone like it owed me something, like it might buzz with an apology or a flight confirmation, or even just a simple, "We're sorry." But nothing came. Just one read receipt, blinking at me like a smirk. No reply, no follow-up, no change. That silence filled the entire room, louder than the heart monitors and the clicking IV drips and the forced hush of nurses making their rounds. I had known disappointment before, but this was different. This was abandonment with full awareness, with sunlight and ocean breeze and time to spare. They were not unaware. They were choosing this, choosing absence. Choosing to let me be the only one in the trenches while they toasted each other under palm trees. I kept staring at the message, waiting for something, anything, a typing bubble that never came. I thought about all the times we fought growing up, all the doors slammed and voices raised and holidays ruined. But none of those fights ever came close to the sound of this silence. It was sharp and final and suffocating. It wasn't just a lack of words. It was the confirmation of everything I feared was true, that they had moved on, that they had already written me out of their version of family, that they were not coming back, not for me and not for him. I looked over at my father, still unconscious, chest rising and falling with machine-guided breath, and I felt the weight of being the only witness to his final hours. They would never see this version of him. They would never hear the rattle in his lungs or see the way his fingers twitched like he was searching for something. And maybe that was their choice, but it was my burden. I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the table. No more begging, no more pretending we were something we weren't. Let them have their sunsets and staged smiles. I had this room and a truth they would never be brave enough to carry. That silence said everything. The question came softly, wrapped in the kind of clinical gentleness that only made it land harder. "Should we call hospice?" the nurse asked, and my chest locked up like a door I could not open. I nodded before I even found the breath to say the word, because the truth had already taken root in the silence between us. Yes, just one syllable, but it swallowed everything. She gave a slight nod and left the room, her shoes making no sound as they carried her away, leaving me alone with the stillness that followed. I sat there staring at him, my father, This man who once shouted so loudly the windows shook, now quiet as snowfall. His body, once broad and towering, looked small beneath the layers of blankets and medical tape. I reached into my bag with hands that barely remembered how to move and pulled out a worn paperback, its pages dog-eared and stained from years of use. He loved poetry, though he never admitted it out loud to anyone but me. Said it made him feel something he couldn't explain, and that scared him a little. I opened to a page he used to quote when he thought no one was listening and began to read aloud, my voice low and steady, the words curling through the room like smoke. I read one after another, not stopping to ask if he could hear me, not needing to. This was not about response. This was about presence, about bearing witness. I read until my throat tightened and my eyes burned, and then I kept reading anyway. I did not do it for them. Not for the wife who vanished into resort packages or the children who had more interest in sand than blood. I did it for him, for the version of him that once danced with me in the living room, clumsy and laughing. For the man who taught me to ride a bike, and then let go before I was ready but cheered when I kept going. I did it for the quiet parts of him no one else ever cared to see. The soft, the scared, the trying. As I read, the machines beside him continued their rhythm, unaware of the shift in the air. I reached for his hand and held it gently, hoping some part of him could still feel the warmth. The poem slowed my breathing, gave me something to hold on to while everything else slipped away. Outside the window, the sky had started to turn gold, like the day was bowing out too. And in that light, surrounded by wires and regret and the sound of my own voice reading words someone else wrote, I felt something almost like peace, not for the way things were, but for the way I chose to meet them. He was not alone. He would not leave this world without someone knowing he mattered. That would be my final gift, not because they deserved it, because he did. It happened just after midnight, the moment folding in on itself so quietly that I almost missed it, almost mistook the stillness for sleep instead of something far more permanent, something you feel before you hear, like a shift in the air or a light going out in a room you didn't know you were standing in. I had been reading again, softly, something familiar and rhythmic that he used to love when I was a child, and my voice trailed off without me realizing as the sound of the machines began to change. Not loud or sudden, just a different kind of rhythm, like a clock skipping its beat. I looked up and saw the line on the monitor beginning to flatten, slow at first, then smooth and unbroken, and I knew without needing anyone to tell me. I did not call for a nurse right away. I just sat there and held his hand, my thumb tracing the worn skin across his knuckles, willing some part of him to feel it, to know he was not alone. There was no dramatic gasp, no flurry of nurses rushing in, no family flying through doors with panicked apologies and late arrivals. There was just me, the one they left behind, the one they stopped calling, the one they whispered about like a problem that solved itself. I sat with him while the machines fell silent, one by one, until the only sound in the room was my own breath and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I wanted to cry but couldn't, not yet. My tears had been rationed in slow drips for days, maybe years, and now they just refused to come. I looked at his face and tried to remember it the way it used to be, full of laughter and stubborn pride, before time and pain carved it into something smaller. The final version of him did not look like the man who used to lift me onto his shoulders at the county fair or grumble when I beat him at cards. He looked tired, finished, and maybe that was mercy. I reached over and pressed the call button. Not ready, but understanding it had to be done. The nurse came in quietly, nodded, checked the machines, then placed a hand on my shoulder in the softest way possible. She asked if I wanted time. I said yes. And she left me there in that room that had become something sacred, not because of its cleanliness or its stillness, but because it held the last of him. I sat for a while, unsure how long, and let the moment settle around me like dust. There would be calls to make, decisions to face, paperwork and logistics and people pretending to care. But for now, there was just this. A room, a silence, a hand no longer holding mine, a goodbye they never bothered to give. And me, still here, still the only one who came. I wrote the obituary in the same silence I had sat in for days, the only sound being the occasional rustle of the page as I crossed out and rewrote words that felt too heavy or not heavy enough. I stared at the blank screen for a long time before typing the first sentence, unsure how to sum up a man who had been both the cause of so many storms and the shelter from them too. The words felt clumsy at first, too formal, too detached, so I stripped them down until they were just simple truths. His name, his age, his city. A life survived by children who were not there, and a wife who found comfort oceans away. I didn't lie, but I didn't expose them either. I left room for interpretation, a luxury they never gave me. When it was finished, I submitted it to the local paper, paid the fee myself, and emailed the funeral home to confirm the arrangements. I chose the music he used to hum under his breath, the photo where he still looked strong, the flowers he always said reminded him of spring. No one asked me to. No one offered to help. I did it not because they deserved to be spared the guilt of doing nothing, but because he deserved at least one person to see this through. Later that night, I opened social media and saw it had already begun. My siblings had reposted the obituary like it was a shock, adding captions filled with broken heart emojis and long-winded tributes to a man they abandoned in silence. My brother posted a black and white photo of Dad holding him as a child, writing about the lessons he learned, the strength he admired. My sister wrote a paragraph about gratitude and grief, using hashtags like she was branding her own mourning. I read each post in stunned disbelief, the performative grief twisting something hot and bitter in my stomach. Then my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. It was short. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure if I felt more rage or numbness. I thought about the message I had sent days earlier, the one with no replies. I thought about the photos of them smiling in Bali, the pool, the cocktails, the laughter while I held his hand in a room full of machines, and I typed only one sentence back. I did. I put the phone down after that, not waiting for a reply, because there was nothing left they could say that would change what had already happened. They missed it. Not just his death, but everything that led up to it. They missed the moments that mattered, and now they wanted to rewrite history in filters and captions. But I was the one who was there. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who buried him, and that truth does not need to be reposted. They arrived like a breeze that forgot the storm, stepping off the plane in coordinated outfits with rolling suitcases and skin still glowing from days spent basking in a place they would probably never associate with guilt. I watched from a distance as they strolled into the funeral home lobby, sunglasses perched on their heads, looking more like guests at a wedding than mourners at a goodbye. My brother hugged the funeral director like he was thanking a concierge, and my sister clutched a designer clutch as if it were armor against the discomfort of grief. Their eyes scanned the room until they landed on me, and for a moment, I thought maybe one of them would walk toward me with some kind of apology in their eyes, some acknowledgement of the days I spent alone by his side. But all I saw was confusion. Confusion that I did not smile. Confusion that I did not greet them with open arms. My sister approached, her heels clicking against the polished floor, and she leaned in close like we were sharing secrets instead of pain. "You're being cold," she whispered, like my silence was the greater sin. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not a woman in mourning, but someone trying to control a narrative. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I simply said, "You're lucky I let you stand beside his casket." She blinked, taken aback, as if the words had struck a place in her she thought was untouchable. I walked away before she could answer, unwilling to let her drag me into a performance she had already rehearsed. Inside the chapel, the casket sat open beneath soft light, and I stood near it while they took their seats, whispering to one another like this was just another family function they had to endure. I watched them nod along to the eulogy I had written, the one they didn't know I wrote, the one that told the truth without pointing fingers but still left no room for denial. They dabbed at dry eyes with tissues they barely used, casting occasional glances my way as if still unsure why I felt distant. As if their absence in the weeks leading up to this day had not already answered that question 1,000 times over. I did not cry during the service. I had cried already, in a hospital room where no one joined me. I had screamed into jackets and written obituaries and watched a man take his last breath with no one else around to say goodbye. They got the part with flowers and soft lighting. I got the part with beeping machines and a last whispered question. After the final prayer, they rose like they had earned the right to grieve. And I stood still, knowing the only thing colder than my silence was the truth they refused to see. When the time came to speak, I stepped up to the podium with my heart pounding like a drum in my throat, not because I feared public speaking, but because I knew what truth could do when it was spoken in a room built on silence. The chapel was still, rows of familiar strangers seated beneath soft lights and floral arrangements that smelled too sweet, like they were trying to disguise the rot beneath the surface. I did not write the kind of eulogy people expected. There were no embellished childhood stories or grand declarations of sainthood. I cleared my throat, looked out over the heads, bowed in forced reverence, and spoke for him, and only him. I talked about the man he was, not the version they preferred to remember. I talked about the weight he carried, the darkness he fought, the hurt he sometimes passed on without meaning to. I talked about how he tried, how he failed, and how he tried again. I talked about the late-night conversations we had when his hands shook too hard to hold a glass, and how he confessed things no one else ever heard. I talked about the way he softened in his final days, how he looked at me not as the daughter they had written off, but as someone who stayed when no one else did. I spoke about the emptiness of the room when he took his last breath, how the people who claimed to love him were laughing on beaches while he struggled to hold on. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. The truth hovered above them like a cloud they had hoped would not follow them here. I never once looked their way. I kept my eyes on the casket, on the quiet shell of the man who had once carried me on his shoulders and taught me how to cast a fishing line in a lake we never went back to. I let the silence that followed each sentence sit heavy in the air, filling the room with everything they tried to pretend wasn't real. I said he was complicated. I said he was flawed. And I said he mattered. When I finished, I folded the paper in half, placed it in the inside pocket of my coat, and returned to my seat without glancing sideways. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, as if I had reached into the casket and pulled out a version of him they had buried long before he died. But I felt no shame, no guilt, only clarity. The kind that comes from saying what needed to be said, even when it shakes the walls. I did not speak for their comfort. I did not speak to mend what had been broken. I spoke because he deserved to be remembered whole, and I refused to let the last words spoken over him be a lie. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and expensive paper, and the air felt too cold for a day that should have held at least a trace of warmth, but maybe that was fitting. We sat around a long oak table, the lawyer flipping through pages with the steady rhythm of someone used to dropping bombs between sips of water. My mother sat across from me, her posture tight and elegant, her lips pressed so firmly together they looked carved in stone. My brother leaned back like this was an errand he was eager to finish, and my sister tapped her perfectly polished nails against her phone as if even death could not interrupt her scrolling. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, heart steady in a way that surprised me. Then the lawyer cleared his throat, placed the final page before him, and said the words that would split the air. "Your father updated his will 2 months ago. Everything," he said. His home, his accounts, his pension, the savings he never talked about, every last cent and scrap left to me. No conditions, no clauses, just my name in his handwriting, written with the same stubborn loops he used on every note he ever scribbled. My siblings blinked as if they had not heard correctly, as if the echo of the words had somehow bent the meaning. My mother went still, her face draining of color so fast I thought she might faint. She turned to me with eyes that burned and hissed through clenched teeth. She manipulated him. It was not anger, it was accusation, cold and sharp, the kind that expects others to agree. But the lawyer remained calm, tapping the page with one finger as he spoke. He wrote it in his own hand. Dated, witnessed, legal. I did not speak. I did not defend myself. I let the truth sit between us like a glass wall only they had failed to see through. I remembered the day he asked me to bring him a pen and paper, how he had looked out the hospital window with a kind of exhausted clarity and told me he wanted to get things in order. I had not asked questions. I had not begged or prodded. I simply handed him the notebook and stepped out of the room. Whatever he wrote was his decision, not mine. I watched now as my sister blinked rapidly to hide the sting in her eyes and my brother shifted in his seat, suddenly far more alert. My mother sat back, arms crossed, jaw clenched tight. No one congratulated me. No one offered a hand or a word. I did not expect them to, but I saw something flicker across each of their faces. It was not just shock. It was the undeniable recognition that despite all their distance, all their pride, all their absence, he had seen me. In the end, he had chosen me. Not because I asked him to. Because I was the one who stayed. I did not plan it. I did not sit down with a strategy or think through the consequences. I just opened my phone, scrolled to the last photo I had taken in that hospital room, and stared at it for a long moment before my thumb moved. The image was simple, almost clinical. His bed, empty. Sheets folded with precision. The machines disconnected and pushed aside. The kind of photo that looks like it belongs in a brochure for end-of-life care, sterile and quiet, except this one held something more. The absence in it was heavy. His absence. I added a caption with only 3 words. He died waiting. That was all I wrote. No names, no tags, no hashtags, no blame, just the truth. A soft whisper dropped into the noise of the internet. Nothing flashy or cruel, but truth has a way of echoing. Within minutes, it was shared, then reshared. Quietly at first, and then louder, until strangers began commenting things like "this broke me," and "how could they leave," and "I see you." People pieced it together, the timeline, the vacation photos, the silence. They scrolled back through my siblings' posts, through the smiling beach selfies and the poolside drinks, and the captions about family time and paradise. The contrast hit like thunder. My post gathered weight not because I shouted, but because I didn't. Their pages, once filled with curated joy, began to flood with comments. Some were angry. Others just asked the kind of questions they had avoided for years. Did you know? Were you there? Why weren't you home? I did not respond. I watched as their likes turned to question marks, as their tags stopped glowing, as their followers slowly peeled away. One by one, they began deleting. First, the Bali photos, then the captions. Then, for some, entire profiles. My sister changed her privacy settings. My brother issued a vague apology in a story that disappeared in 24 hours. My mother said nothing at all. I sat in the same living room where I used to hide from their voices, now filled with sunlight and the strange quiet that follows a storm. I did not feel satisfaction. Not exactly, but I did feel still. Like for once, the weight had shifted. Like for once, people saw what I had always known. That absence is louder than presence when it is deliberate. That you can smile in a photo and still be the one who left. I did not name them. I did not have to. The silence between my words held every name they tried to hide behind. The world filled in the blanks. And as the noise around them grew, I put my phone down, stepped outside, and let the wind press against my face. For the first time in a long time, I breathed without apology. The house is quieter than I remember, though maybe that's because this time I am not arriving with baggage in both hands and tension braced in my shoulders. This time I have the key. I opened the door and let the familiar creak of the hinges welcome me home. Not the kind of home that always felt like walking on eggshells, but something new, something earned. I walked through each room slowly, letting the dust settle around me, touching the chipped corners of furniture he refused to throw away, and the bookshelf still filled with titles I once gave him. The air smells like old wood and memory, and it does not make me flinch. I plant the flowers he loved most beneath the kitchen window, digging through soil with bare hands and feeling the sun on my back like a quiet approval. Marigolds, bright and stubborn, just like him. I hang wind chimes by the porch and let them sing even when no one is around to hear them. Inside, I frame the last photo I took of him, the one where he managed a half smile from his hospital bed, IV in his arm, eyes tired but somehow still full of thanks. I place it on the mantel where the old family portrait used to hang, the one that told a prettier lie. I sit across from it with a cup of tea and stare into those eyes, not with sadness, but with something that feels like permission. I do not forgive them. Not for the silence, not for the absence, not for the way they tried to erase me like a smudge on their perfect picture. But I forgive myself, for the years I twisted into someone more palatable. For the day I walked away when it finally hurt too much to stay. For coming back, not for them, but for him. For me. I forgive the girl who used to wonder if her love was ever enough, who learned to accept scraps and call it family. I no longer measure myself by their capacity to love or their failure to show up. I stopped waiting for apologies that will never come, stopped rehearsing confrontations in my head that would only drain me. They can keep their retreats and their reputations. They can keep pretending. I have something they cannot touch. I have the memory of his hand in mine when he took his last breath. I have the garden growing outside the window, bright and alive. I have this house, not as a relic, but as a beginning. I have peace, not loud or sweeping, but steady, like a quiet tide washing over everything that once felt sharp. And in this peace, I choose to stay, not because I have to, because I want to, because I finally can.